Welcome, everyone, back to our show. Today we have Dr. Naras Lapsys joining us today. I know you from the work that you and I do together at the clinic, but let me give you a little bit of background on Dr. Naras. So he is a specialist in molecular genetics, beginning your career a while ago, a long time ago, as a research scientist investigating obesity and diabetes. You have a master's degree in nutrition and dietetics.
Correct.
Yeah. You also are very involved in weight management, chronic disease, gastrointestinal health. You've observed that stress, sleep, fitness, and state of mind have a significant impact on how people eat and all of how these factors intertwine with health. Now, why you're here today is because of your work, which is your current focus, which is very much in longevity and the profound role that nutrition and lifestyle plays on disease prevention, healthy aging, and lifespan. So now you work, and you're actually the Chief Clinical Officer at Chi Longevity, which is Asia's first science-driven, medically-led longevity clinic in Singapore.
Yeah.
So welcome. As I was saying right before we started, I'm so thrilled you said yes. To me, I love this topic. And so let me start by asking you, what does longevity mean to you?
Okay, so I think that if I look back at my career and the things that I've been interested in, I've always had some finger in health one way or another, even when I was very young. But I also saw my parents being really actually not that healthy, and they both died relatively young due to not doing the right things. They consumed too much alcohol, their eating patterns weren't great. I watched their exercise fall away. I saw their social lives sort of retract as time passed. And when you have that sort of environment, you quite often just don't want that for yourself. And I think if anything, that sort of always pushed me to be doing what I believed was the right thing. And as it turns out, I seemed to enjoy doing that for other people as well. So I would actually say that my interest in longevity is rooted from childhood. And then just the career path that I followed has sort of brought me to sort of this place now.
One of the things, because I read a lot about this, I'm really, really interested in it. There's this idea of longevity, which is live longer. So health, lifespan, but then there's also this idea of health span, which is living longer, but healthily.
Yeah.
Right. And so I'm just curious, because you've worked with thousands of people, what do you notice is the trend now? Like, what are you noticing is what people are interested in?
So people are interested in both now. I think that we almost all sort of just assumed that we were going to follow a particular trajectory. And you don't think about it so much, but you know that somewhere down the track you're not going to be so well, but usually it's later, so you tend not to think about it. And that eventually you'll be unwell, and then time will pass, and then your time on this planet will be over. But you tend not to think so much, and we tended to just accept that that was the fate. And then I think in the last few years, it's been challenged with the types of things that we've seen on television or the books that we've read, is to say, actually, that paradigm might be different. You could live your life significantly healthier for longer. Or another way to put it is rather than health span, it's sick span, right?
I've never heard that. What is that?
The other way around is because we kind of have a bit of an idea of when we start to be unwell, right? Which is a little bit easier to know when you are well, right? So at what point does sick span begin? Is that when you're now taking medications, or you now know that you can't do the things that you used to do, right? And then at that point, then how long are you going to continue to be sick for? And so I think people are challenging that idea that we don't want to be unhealthy for many, many, many years. And then the idea that you could be healthy for even longer than you had anticipated, or maybe your life could extend a little bit longer That's almost like the icing on the cake. I think there's
Yeah.
very few people that say, I want to live longer miserable.
Yeah,
Right?
that's right. You know, there was one, I read Dr. Peter Attia's books, and there was one thing that's lingering for me, which is he talks about this idea of having a declaration of how long you want to live, minus 10 years. What do you want to be able to still do at that age? And for me, that was really eye-opening, because I started to break down things like travel, for example, independence, mobility, being able, something so micro that I take for granted today, putting my suitcase, my roly-poly
Yeah.
up on the overhead. I mean, that doesn't even occur to me now, but it's true. If at, 80, 90 years old, I still want to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And I think it's such a powerful thing to go, therefore, what do I need to be doing now to be able to impact that future, right?
Yep.
Wow. Okay. So what do you think are some of the fallacies that people have been carrying around living longer healthily that the research is now challenging?
I think that one of the big challenges that we now see is that people have assumed that we have chronic health conditions that are ultimately going to take our health and our life, right? And the books that you've read and sort of the general concept is that things like heart disease and metabolic disease, cognitive decline, cancer, all of these are chronic health conditions that are going to, essentially plague us, all of us at some point, right? And I think that the challenge that has been brought in is there something that underpins that? Is the aging process itself something that then leads to those chronic health conditions? And if that's the case and you address the aging process, are you now delaying the onset or even preventing some of these health conditions from happening? And that's the new paradigm. And that's something that is new, and I think that's what's been challenging medicine. And I think this is where a lot of the science is going, and a lot of the therapeutics and the behavioural changes are coming at. It's that idea. So it's almost saying, and again, I don't want to put it this way, but the aging process itself is a disease.
Right.
You could view it that way or not. You can say it's natural, but is to say, well, then how do you address that? And I think that's where longevity medicine is really starting to shine, and this is where we are.
I don't know if you can reveal any of this, but just curious, what's in the works? What's being researched now that scientists, researchers are poking around into that might be of interest?
So I just came back from a conference overseas in Copenhagen that is looking at all of the things that you've just said. And I think the one that resonated to me the most was actually that it's to do with women, right? So half the population is women. We now know women age quite differently from men, and women's ovaries age faster than any other organ. Yet we don't know that much about women's ovaries. We don't know much about women ovarian aging, but when a woman's ovaries age faster than the other organs, and then at a particular point they're now not working the same way that they used to, sets a whole cascade of other health conditions that accelerate. So the interest now in women and aging and ovaries and aging, I think, is just opening up some very, very interesting doors.
That's interesting. Is that
Really
that's
interesting.
linked with hormones too? Because that's
Of course.
wow.
Yeah. And it's not just fertility. We're not just talking about fertility here. So I think for me that was eye-opening, because it's been ignored. But it now means that we all need to think, right, that men and women age differently, and how it goes about is completely different.
Right.
And there's some keys here, some interesting areas to look into.
Yeah. Wow, that is interesting. Huh. Okay. I need to stay kind of conscious because I could go into this whole medical and what's going on. If we bring it back to just human, just the ontological piece and just being human, what do you notice as you work with your different clients? What sort of behaviors do you notice limit people? I mean, it could be your clients or people who are kind of dabbling, or maybe even social conversations. What do you notice are the common barriers that people go, you know what? Okay, let's do this.
So
What do you notice?
the kinds of barriers that I've found interesting, right, that you might not have necessarily thought about, have been things like, let's say, for example, I have a client who is carrying extra body weight, and they know that it's important for them to shift it, but there's a barrier for them to doing it. You would all kind of assume that you just naturally want to look and feel a different way. But what happens if that body weight that you've been carrying has actually been an armor of some sort, and that by having this particular look, perhaps, you might not be getting noticed by people and you don't want to be noticed. Or it makes you invisible, and that's exactly what you're trying to do.
Ooh, that's
right,
powerful.
Right. So then that person's barrier is something that you may have never imagined before, right? And so then it's, that's a big one, right? To how to find your way through. So, the psychological barriers that we have can be varied and really come from places that you might never have imagined.
So if I'm talking to the coaches in the audience, right?
Yeah.
Well, number one, if I put my coaching hat on, it takes a lot of courage. If someone has been living their life behind this armor and it gets comfortable, and suddenly I go, you know what? I'm in my life now where let's see what happens as I shed.
Yeah.
Have you noticed where people then jump in? Let's just use your example. They shed the weight.
Yeah.
But then they go, okay, this is way too much attention, or this is and then they put it back on. Yeah. Does that happen?
It can happen, right? But again, I think if you're a coach,
yeah,
then being aware of these things are important, right? So it might not be that it was the conference that they went to or the holiday that they had and they relaxed on their training program and eating, etc. But it might be something else that is at play.
Wow, that is really powerful. Which then brings me to so that's a barrier.
Yeah.
Identity, right? Who am I? Who am I now? Who do I want to be after this? I don't know if it's a journey of health, or maybe a declaration of the kind of future that I want. Have you noticed any trends in that? What have you noticed?
So recently we had a client come through and spend 10 months with us. And we look at their blood markers and their physical markers, and we can say that maybe their biological age has shifted, all these things. But we also have a psychological component, and we were talking about what was this person's quality of life and how had things potentially changed. And he said one of the most compelling things that had happened was that people were perceiving him now differently, and that he hadn't anticipated it, but the way his partner and his children and his colleagues now view him is different, and that he hadn't anticipated it. And it was as big a driver as all of the other health changes that he had had, right? Because, and in fact, so there was some kind of identity shift in him that people had noticed, that he had picked up on and was thriving with.
Oh, that's really juicy, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's kind of the intangibles
right.
that you often don't know. You're not, if we ask, what are you trying to get out of this next 12 months or the intentions that you have, often it's really interesting to then find out, or you ask, what are the things that you hadn't anticipated, right, that have now happened? And it can be that, or it might be, say, an executive who says, my body composition changed and my golf swing got better, right? I'm not stronger or anything else, but my whole dynamics of my body has shifted. I had to retrain the way I do it, but now I've got this amazing golf swing, and I love my sport again, or I've gotten incrementally better. an intangible that we'd never imagined.
And also with just being physically lighter, I just move differently.
Yeah.
Right? When I move differently, maybe I move faster. I mean, one from my own experience with the clinic is, where do I say yes? Which is everywhere. And where have I not been willing to say no?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the domino effect of how I fit in my exercise. And I go, oh my God, where do I squeeze it in? Squeezing in doesn't work, as I've learned. Yeah. And so that's a huge one for me. And I knew it intellectually, but being in the hot seat versus being the coach on the other side, it's a real pause and awakening, right? Awareness for me.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, really powerful. What do you notice has been success stories on people who have successfully broken their barriers? You know, they've held back or they've been unsuccessful for years, and then they either come to see you guys or they've even been unsuccessful in the beginning. What do you notice are some of the best practices maybe?
I think that let's say we've had some people who've been very, very fixed in their ways. And because they've been doing what they believe is the right thing for a very, very long time, that there's no room to change what it is that they do, right? Is to say, if I make this change, then this won't happen and this won't happen, and my whole day will be, will all unfurl, and it will be a mess, right? And so then they're extremely resistant to really change any single thing at all.
You've had clients this.
Many people like that, but because of it, they're stuck.
Right.
And they might be stuck in perpetual stress, let's say, because you have to achieve all of these particular things. And if anything is changed from any of that, I'm only going to become even more stressed, because then I can't do all the things that I needed and wanted to do. And that if we're able to challenge that sometimes and actually say, if you make this adjustment here, right? Let's say, for example, that buys you 30 minutes more sleep. What does that then look like the next morning when you wake up? Oh, actually, you're a little bit more refreshed. You're a little bit more efficient with what you've done with your time. And now you're actually doing something a little bit better, and you hadn't anticipated that that's what it would be.
So you take that big elephant and you make it into biteable micro.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And then people go, oh, okay, I can do that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the approaches that we have around just performance, driving performance, which is that huge elephant just looks like there's no way I can tackle this.
Yeah.
And then incremental micro wins.
Yeah.
Right.
But they have to be prepared to do those little ones.
That's right.
Yeah. And you've got to be able to convince that it's going to be okay, and that it won't interrupt everything else, right? But actually they can discover that the follow-on effect is good.
Yeah. Just listening to you talk and just experiencing it myself, the role of a community, I think, plays a big. So certainly the team at the clinic are just really, really on your team. And I'm just thinking, if we lift that conversation to just who I have in my life around me, have you noticed that makes a huge difference?
It does, positive and negative.
Oh, tell me, what do you mean?
So let's say you have a partner who is embedded in a set of patterns and out of just, living, in some kind of harmony with that person, you've now had to take on board, or you've chosen to take on board some of their patterns, and they're not serving you well. You've got to be able to readdress that and say, I love you. You do these things. I can't be part of that anymore. And
that's hard, isn't it?
It's very, very hard, right? Because it might not be harmful for them, or maybe it is harmful for them, but they're not prepared to address it yet. But it's not serving our client well, and then they need to have a divorce from that.
Right.
So that's when, where there can be a negative side of things. And you might call that person an enabler or whatever else it might be, but I don't think it needs to necessarily be labelled. But that's a suggestion or a scenario where your environment perhaps is not conducive to the things that you want to do. And then, of course, you've got your outer circle of people that are going to be there to support.
Yeah. And also, so support, so external supporting you to succeed, but also there's that element of you showing up in a certain way that inspires other people to get on board as well.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm just thinking of the interview that you had where you talked about your kids, right? And so I just wonder your lifestyle where you're pretty clean in terms of your exercise, food intake. I'm just curious how it's impacted them.
Yeah, I think it has a positive impact. So I can use this morning, for example, right? So everybody's been a little bit unwell. I don't know whether Singapore has got some bug that's going around, but every single member in our family has sort of woken up one morning feeling not 100%, right? Yet, how do we show up today, right? Well, I might not have been particularly well, but I'm still showing up. I've done the best that I can with my sleep. I'm refreshed, and I'm going to face the day, right? One of my young daughters is very, very good at that.
How old is she?
The 11-year-old's very staunch, and but then the older one this morning was, wavering a little bit, right? And it was, what, you going to try to get a day off school here, or what is it you're trying to do? And it was, it was the wording was to say, well, it's going to be a hard day today. Take a deep breath, see how you feel once you're at school, but there's some strepsils.
This is her younger sister saying this?
No, this was
this
me
is you
saying
saying
her at 6:00 this morning.
Right.
Let's do this, right? And I was very pleased. 10 minutes later, she came down and she was in her school uniform and ready to face the day.
Wow.
Right? But there was that point at which, is she going to stay in bed or is she not? But, when I went into the room, the assumption was no, some days are tough. You're getting up. Right?
Yeah.
And she's not so sick that she's going to make the rest of the school sick or anything like that. But it's those types of things.
Yeah. So you're creating a culture.
Yeah.
Which I think is really, so my husband, he generally is really fit. And with me being in this program, he started to really rev his, and started to kind of go, hey, you haven't done your workout today. I think, you have an hour, go. And so that was actually refreshing for me because it wasn't me against my own demons. Yeah. It was me against my husband, not against, but you know what I mean? Yeah. He was the one nudging me. And that was really nice. Wow. So as we start to wrap this up, is there anything that you would like to leave our listeners with? Whether it's around this theme called longevity, health span, lifespan, or just general health, what do you think is important?
I think that if we go back to what you had said about thinking about your final 10 years of life, how you would want it to be, you don't even need to think that far ahead. I think that all of us can have a bit of an idea of how we think we're tracking, and being perhaps quite honest with ourselves and saying, am I doing the things that actually are important? And I know that it might take work. And it might be similar to someone who says, well, it's important for me to save. Am I actually saving, or am I still going out and spending money on the credit card and I'm only just scraping by? But if you're looking at it from a health perspective, is to give yourself a bit of an honest audit and say, am I doing some things right or wrong? And if I'm not doing those things yet, could I set the bar low and get started? Right? Because I'm yet to meet somebody who couldn't do a little bit more or do a little bit better.
Oh, that's really good. I like that. Set the bar lower so that you can hit it.
Correct.
And then eventually exceed it. And then that bar just keeps going up.
Yep.
Wow. The other thing that you said, and let me just address the viewers or listeners, is to really think about, where am I now? Right? Where exactly am I? Not where should I be, that's nice too, to think about where I should be or where I want to be, but where exactly am I? And take a real honest look at what my baseline is and start there, no matter how amazing or ugly it may be, so long as you get clear of where you start. And if I speak to the coaches in the audience, or actually anyone, any community of support, to know that some of these moves are really challenging for people.
Yeah.
It takes courage, and to be able to spot, right? If someone falls back, to go, get back on the horse, right? Wow. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah. All right. Well, very good. Thank you, viewers and listeners, for listening, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.